Hi everyone, welcome in our lesson about investigative photography. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the use of photography in police work, apply the basic knowledge in preparation and presentation of photographic pieces of evidence in solving criminal cases as form of support or supplementary with regards to the information that is gathered in the crime scene, and also you should be able to cite the duty of a forensic photographer. Forensic photography is otherwise known as crime scene photography, which is basically the application of the principles of photography for the purposes of court presentation. It includes forensic imaging if we deal with digital photographs or digital images that would be presented in court that is covered in the rules on electronic evidence, and also crime scene photography, the photographs of the items or physical objects or evidence that is captured, recorded during the crime scene processing that would be presented in the court. Forensic photography is the art of producing an accurate reproduction of a crime scene or an accident scene using photography for the benefit of court or to aid in an investigation. Remember that the purpose of forensic photography is to provide an accurate graphical or pictorial representation for court presentation. Accurate in a sense that there should be no alteration from that photographic evidence that would be offered in court. It involves the process of collecting and providing photos of the victims, the place, and items involved in the crime scene. So the purpose basically of forensic photography is to record the photos of the victim, place, and item. To record the event, time, and the place. Photographing the crime scene is part of the crime scene investigation process, which involves the documentation of the crime scene. Well, photography is not the only means and ways in documenting the crime scene, but also there are other ways, such as sketching the crime scene. However, photography provides the most accurate or most accurate graphical representation of the crime scene and the items that is found on the crime scene. So the purpose of photographing the crime scene is to record the scene and associated areas simply by the pictorial record produced by photographing the crime scene. This is used for future reference to record the appearance of physical evidence. It is also one way of preserving evidence in its original form by taking a photograph of it, and to provide investigators with a photographic record of the scene to assist them with their investigations, because not all information, not all items cannot uh, cannot be recalled accurately by an investigator, which a photograph would serve as an aid for them to remember something that is found on the crime scene and to present the crime scene in court. So there are certain pieces of evidence that cannot be brought to court. Then, by means of photographing them, it is one way in showing also what is that particular item or object in the court. So there are 5 acceptable methods in court in order to preserve the crime scene. First, by means of photography. Okay, and that is what we call the forensic or crime scene photography. In photography, it is the process now of capturing images of items, objects that is found on the crime scene in a sensitized material. So sketching also involves the graphic representation of a scene of the crime with a complete measurement of relative distances of items. So crime sketching could be in a form of a rough sketch, which is sketched by the sketcher in the crime scene itself, and the final sketch, which is for the purpose of court presentation. Notes taking also or description. Kaya nga laging may tickler ang investigator in conducting the crime scene, where he or she would record the time, date, whatever pertinent information that is found on the crime scene or that is gathered by the investigator. Next is in the mannequin method. In this mannequin method, it is used in the physical crime scene reconstruction. Okay, and also preservation in the mind of the witnesses. So there are informations, there are data that could be elicited from the witnesses. So the witnesses or the witness personally is the one who experienced or who has a first-hand evidence about the crime scene. And information from the witnesses is gathered through the interview, okay, one of the eyes of the investigation. Here, the basic importance of crime scene photography. It refreshes memory, it preserves time and event, because in a photograph you will know what would be the approximate time where they've processed the crime scene, kung nighttime ba, daytime ba, and event, the nature of the incident itself. In addition, crime scene photography saves money and effort. So hindi na kailangan na i-sketch per item ng sketcher yung mga items or objects that is found on the crime scene. Pwedeng i-photograph na lang. Lalong-lalo na ngayon, we are shifting towards digital photography already. Hindi na yung sa traditional photography where very expensive yung pagre-reproduce ng mga photographs by means of film. So, kaya kakailanganin pa ng darkroom processing iyon. In general, here are the importance of photography in law enforcement. So first, for record purposes, for future reference that would aid the investigator to remember things. Okay, lalong-lalo na kapag they are reviewing certain case. Next is to preserve perishable evidence. And what are these perishable evidence? These are transient evidence or your biological evidence such as semen, such as blood, na it could be easily destroyed. So kailangan i-preserve by photographing them. And these kinds of evidence cannot be brought to the court. So it can be brought to the court and be presented by means of a photograph. Next is, it serves as identification of physical evidence kasi nga it produces a pictorial record of the item itself. Photograph is also necessary in obtaining admission or confession in the process of interrogation of suspects. Here, remember that interrogation is one of the four I's of criminal investigation, where admission of guilt or admission of guilt or the acknowledgement of guilt, or called as confession, is being gathered. So depending on the technique applied by the interrogator. So a photograph, if a investigator or an interrogator have shown a photograph to the suspect, he cannot really deny it already because that serves as an evidence. So it's either he will have an admission of certain facts or circumstances, or he would acknowledge his guilt and confess that he was the one who committed the crime. So the difference of admission and confession is that admission is the acknowledgement of certain facts surrounding the circumstances in a certain incident, and while the confession is the admission of guilt. Aminin niya na siya talaga yung gumawa ng krimen. Photographs also makes things invisible visible through the use of specialized techniques such as with the use of infrared photography and ultraviolet photography. A photograph is also useful in determining the truth because it provides a pictorial record, unless it is edited, which will be later on be proven during the court presentation. Do not forget the CCS, or the rules in the presentation of photographic evidence, if you will be summoned as a forensic photographer in court. So, CCS stands for consistency, clarity, and scale. A photograph must be consistent. Whatever you will put in your photographic log must be consistent in a way that it must be presented in a logical manner. In a logical manner, in a sense that you put first the photograph that you've taken first in your first frame. Okay, yung una mong photograph. For example, syempre as a forensic photographer, you must photograph first in the overall view, on the general view of the crime scene. So, establish mo muna the building, the entrance, the exit, the adjoining buildings, yung mga katabi niyang buildings, yung mga katapat niyang buildings, and also the route papunta doon sa crime scene. Consistency. It must be presented in a logical manner. Next is clarity. Pag sinabi naman natin clarity, the photograph or the photographic evidence that will be presented in court must be it must be big enough to show prominent details. Clarity would mean application of all the basic principles in the photography. Dapat hindi overexposed yan. Dapat hindi underexposed yan. Dapat clear yung item or evidence that is photographed. Ayan. And also, it must be big enough to show the prominent details of that certain item para mas accurate yung representation ng item or evidence na yan. Okay, aside from that, is do not forget your scale. Remember your golden rule in criminal investigation that do not move, do not touch, move, or alter anything in the crime scene, okay, unless it is properly measured, sketched, and photographed. Do not, in order to avoid the contamination of the evidence, and do not mutilate and alter pieces of evidence. So, with or without scale, with or without measurement, kailangang i-photograph mo yan. So, scale indicates measurement of that particular object. So, photograph with or without scale. Bago mo tanggalin yung evidence or bago mo i-mark, you should always photograph it. Evidence photography particularly deals with the photograph of the items or the physical evidence that is found on the crime scene. So, conforming with the rules that we've discussed a while ago, the CCS, the consistency, clarity, and scale, in scale, the images must be clear, and usually they have scales, right? So they serve not only to remind the investigators of the scene, but also to provide tangible image for the court to better enable them for the judge, the lawyers, to enable them to understand what really happened in that certain incident. So a photograph serves as a permanent record, okay, of the original appearance of the object. The use of also several views taken from different angles helps to minimize the problem of the parallax. Yan. Diba? The parallax, iba yung nakita sa na-record. So, overall images do not really have scales. Yung established shot, di mo na kailangan ng scale dyan, di ba? Kasi, the purpose of the overall images or the established shot or the general view is to show the general layout of the crime scene. So, it is evidence photography. The photograph of the evidence is used in place of a physical evidence. Ano nga ba yung physical evidence, di ba? A physical evidence is anything that is any object, any item that is addressed to the senses of the court. Anything that is perceived by our senses. Sense of sight, sense of hearing, sense of taste, ayan, sense of touch, ano pa? Yung mga yan, anything that is perceived by our senses. And also, it supplements case report. Photographic evidence cannot be used solely to convict a person. It serves as only a corroboratory evidence. It only supplements the case report. It only supports the existing evidence at hand by the investigator. Aside from that, it preserves evidence from unnecessary handling because it could already produce an accurate representation, or it serves as a pictorial record of that physical evidence, lalong-lalo na if the evidence is a transient evidence or a perishable evidence, evidence that could be easily destroyed. Yung mga biological evidence na yan, like blood stains, semen, yan, saliva, ayan mga yan. For a photograph to be admitted in court, remember the rules of your evidence. For an evidence to be admitted in court, it must be relevant and competent. Okay? Relevancy would mean it is material to the case, which means an evidence is material if it is offered to prove or to disprove a specific act in issue. Okay? Kung yung ebidensya na yan, yung photographic evidence na yan, can be used to prove or disprove a certain fact that is in issue, yung tinatanong sa korte, then that could be admitted. But remember, it is not only relevancy that we are talking about, but the evidence must also be competent. Pag naman sinabi nating competency of the evidence, it must be obtained in a proper procedure. So, sinunod yung standard operating procedure. Walang violate na SOP. It is not a fruit of the poisonous tree, kumbaga. So, relevancy and competency. Okay? So, the object pictured must be material or relevant to the points in issue. And the photograph must not appeal to the emotion or tend to prejudice the court or jury. Kaya black and white, black and white kapag duguan yung crime scene in order to avoid or appealing emotions to the jury, diba? And here are the requirements for photographs to be admitted as evidence in court. It must provide an accurate representation of an item, of an object that is found in the crime scene that is relevant to the fact in issue. So, it is accurate. Okay, hindi siya na-edit, kumbaga. Next, it is yan, free from distortion, free from defects. Pag sinabi nating accurate representation, photographs must only present bare facts. Okay? Kung knife yan, knife yan. Kung knife yan na duguan, knife yan na duguan. Yun dapat yun. Pag free of distortion, it must be free from any form of photographic defects. The one that we've discussed in your optical aberrations. Ayan, dapat walang ganon. Dapat walang, it must not suffer from distortion. Okay, barrel man yan, pincushion distortion. It must not suffer from flare, from comma, mga ganyan. Next is, it is material and relevant, meaning photographs must be directly significant to the case. And also, a photograph must be unbiased. Big sabihin, it is free from deliberate alterations. It is free from emotional bias. Kaya nga black and white photography yung ginagamit. Kasi ina-avoid natin that the photograph would appeal to the emotion, or if it appeals to the emotion of the jury or of the lawyer, of the judge, then it might prejudice the trial. Okay? So again, you have here the crime scene. Crime scene is very important in crime scene investigation because crime scene holds relevant or pertinent information, okay, that will be gathered and that will help the investigator na pagtagpi-tagpiin itong mga information na to in order to formulate a certain conclusion on how the crime happened. So a crime scene is actually a place where the crime was perpetrated and physical evidence was found. There are two types of crime scene. Your primary crime scene, where the crime was actually committed, and your secondary crime scene, where a location, okay, secondary crime scene is actually a location which holds evidence of the crime, but it is not the location where the crime was originally committed. For example, ang primary crime scene is sa bahay ng biktima. Ang katawan niya natagpuan sa ilalim ng tulay sa Badiwan Bridge. Doon pa lang, yung secondary crime scene is the bridge, in the Badiwan Bridge. So, yan. So, that is the secondary crime scene. It is a location where it holds an evidence, but it is not the place where the original or the crime was originally committed. Here are the standard operating procedures in crime scene photography. Dapat the photographer would follow these SOPs. First, obtain photographs of the crime scene early in the investigation, preferably before anything has been moved. Upon arrival at the crime scene, the photographer must already start photographing the condition of the crime scene, establishing the overall view, the general view, the entrance and exit of that particular building. Second, that photograph from several angles of, of the crime scene so that proper dimensions may be shown. So you photograph if that is an indoor crime scene, photograph from the four corners of the room. Okay? Tapos, when dimensions are important, use some sort of scale in the photograph so that enlargement or reduction may be measured. So, if that is also again in an indoor crime scene, kapag you're photographing the four corners of the room, kailangan may scale, may measurement. Okay, so that is the responsibility now of the measurer. Pero kung kulang, syempre, kung na yung photographer, kapag yung measure. Pero usually, kapag meron yung sketcher and meron naman talaga dapat sketcher, siya na rin yung measurer. As a photographer, aside from photographing the crime scene or the objects that are found on the crime scene, you should also have your tickler. Again, remember in your legal methods of preserving evidence or preserving information is note-taking. You should also take note of the directions, distances of the objects that is photographed on the crime scene. That would serve as it would help you as a photographer to remember where this particular evidence that is photographed located. For special equipment, call the laboratory technicians in the crime lab itself, the PNP crime lab, such as you need a camera boom eh hindi mo na idala, hindi mo na i-prepare, which you should always consider that as a photographer. You should always prepare your things, your equipment. Yan. Kaya kailangan mo ng special type of filter or kailangan mo ng UV light in order for you to capture or photograph the white blood stains or white semen, mga ganyan. The key element in crime scene photography is to establish the four major shots. Okay? So the general view or long-range view, the medium view or the mid-range view, close-up view, and the extreme close-up view. So in the general view, it shows the overall view of the crime scene. The intersection, is it a residential area? Is it an airport? Is it a factory? Or is it even middle of a forest or middle of a jungle? So yan, dyan makikita sa general view or long-range view. Dito sa photograph na nakikita nyo, di ba, parang may mali na sobrahan sa cordoning of the area. Wag naman masyadong exage in cordoning the area, tulad nito. So, overall photographs shows the relationship of all evidence in an area and document the overall perspective of the scene. So, pagdating mo doon, you photograph the building where the crime is committed, the adjacent building, yung katapat niya, yung street, and also yung possible, yung entrance ng building and exit exit point of the building. So, the crime scene identification card, yung nilalagay doon, like CSI, case number 001, the day-to-day, ayan, should be photographed with or without that placard muna. So, if placards are utilized to identify the location, evidence at the scene, photos should be taken before and after their placement. Okay, so normal perspective or the human view should be considered in capturing the overall images for to enable the judge to understand the crime scene. Okay, some scenes may require overlapping photos. Overlapping photos in a sense that picturean mo muna sa okay, sa harap, both sides yung four corners if that is an indoor crime scene. Kapag naman outdoor crime scene, kung may panoramic capability yung camera, panoramic mo. Okay? To show the overall view of an area. So if it is an indoor crime scene, there should be 10 photographs of a room using a wide-angle lens. Ano nga ba yung a wide-angle lens has a wide field of view. Okay? So it is used in a restricted area. Lalong-lalo na if it is just a small room. So here are the things that must be photographed. One, from the center of the wall, looking directly to the center of the opposite wall. Yung opposite wall niya, kapag nakasandal ka or sa isang wall, photograph that yung sa harap mo. Next, one from the near floor level at one end of the room looking up to the ceiling. Okay? And one from the same end of the room near to the ceiling height looking down to the floor of the room, giving the total 10 of photographs. So apat na photographs opposite to the wall, isang photograph looking at the ceiling, and one photograph of the end to the near ceiling height looking down to the floor of the room. So that should be included in your photographic log. So this is an example of your medium range view or the medium view or mid-range view. It photographs the immediate crime scene itself. Okay, the room itself. Pagpasok natin doon sa building. Mid-range photograph would establish the relationship of evidence that is found since in the mid-range photograph, it is the photograph of the immediate crime scene itself. Makikita mo what is the relationship from the victim, what is the relationship of these cartridge cases that is found on the side of the victim, for example, or the firearm itself. So yun yung mid-range photograph. Purpose ng mid-range view or the medium view is actually the photograph of an item or an evidence itself. Okay? So these are photographs of small focus areas of the crime scene or individual items. Like for example, if there is a cartridge case that is found at the crime scene, photograph mo yun lang. That is a close-up photograph. Or if it involves shooting incident, do not forget the gunshot wound. Okay? O kaya naman kapag yan is alleged suicide, do not forget to photograph yung mga vital signs, which is the leg, suicide by accident. So it documents the condition of the object and it shows details of the evidence. Minsan, in order to establish the elements or in order to obtain inference about the incident, kailangan ng extreme close-up, lalong-lalo na sa mga wounds. Okay, gunshot wounds, ayan, stab wounds, yan. So here are the guidelines in taking photographs. There must always be established shot. Established shot would be the general view or the long-range view. So it captures now or it determines, it shows if the crime scene is situated in a residential area, yan, or in a farm, or in a building, yan. And also the building itself, its entrance and exit points, yan. Possible entrance sa window, okay, kung there is, it shows forced entry of the building. The hallway itself, yung papunta doon sa crime scene itself. The room, okay, which would fall under the medium view already or the mid-range view. The close-up view and the close-up of certain evidence would be dependent on the nature of the incident and also the kind of items or evidence that is found on the crime scene. The object attacked, yan, close-up view or extreme close-up view. The weapon or tool used, and also kinakailangan rin ng extreme close-up to show the serial number of the firearm used or the tool, kung yan ay a gun, diba? Next would be the significant clues. Ito na yung lalong-lalo na sa mga fingerprint impressions, ginagamitan na ng special technique in photographing the crime scene. Like kung there is a white blood stain, so pwedeng gamitan yun ng ultraviolet photography. Kapag in photographing the Latin print, kailangan mo ng madusts yung Latin print in order to show details and later on photograph. Pwedeng i-photograph yan using macro lens in order to show the details or the region.